What if Oscar found the Omnitrix? Chapter 3. Welcome to Mistral. It was early in the morning and Oscar was looking at a backpack he had packed last night. It contained everything that he would need for his trip to Mistral. So, mind telling me what you need to do before we leave? Ozpin asked. My aunt has been looking after me since my parents died. I'm not going to just abandon her without at least making sure she'll be okay, Oscar said. And how do you plan to do that? Ozpin asked. As I explained, this watch allows me to transform into 10 other beings. 3 of these transformations allow me to achieve my goal. 1 allows me to control plants, so I'm going to use it to grow every type of crop and modify them so that they don't spoil and leave as many seeds as possible, Oscar said. Are you sure you will be able to do so? I know Atlas have been trying to genially engineer super seeds, but they are still in the testing phase, Ozpin said. I'm positive. When I'm transformed, anything they can do becomes second nature to me. It's sort of like walking. If I want to go somewhere I just do, Oscar said. I see. Though I still cannot fathom that this technology exists, and that it supposedly comes from space. Are you sure that thing came from space? Ozpin asked. I'm sure. There's no way Atlas created this thing. They are too busy creating robots that turn on the people and robots that look like humans, Oscar said. Oscar. The robot turning on against us was not Atlas's fault. The robots were most likely hacked by those who wish to destroy Remnant. And Miss Polendina, though she may not be human, she was certainly more human than most of the people on Remnant, Ozpin said. If you say so. Continuing, with the second transformation, I can create crystals that I suspect are as hard if not harder than diamonds. I plan to use those crystals to create grain bins and to create a substantial pile for my aunt to sell, Oscar said. And how do you suppose she does that, if these crystals are harder than diamonds? Ozpin asked. That's where the third transformation comes in. I become a really smart creature and I should be able to build something that could easily cut through, Oscar said. Seems like you have quite a day ahead of you, Ozpin said. I'd say I have quite the life ahead of me, Oscar said. Oscar then soon got to work whilst Emma went into the village. Thanks to the efforts of the Forever Knights, the village had quickly recovered and after today the village would be as good as new. As soon as Emma was gone, Oscar got to work. An hour later he had achieved his goal. Oscar stood back and looked at his handiwork. Very impressive, Oscar, Ozpin said. Thanks, Oscar said. Now, can we go? The longer we wait the less time we have to formulate a plan with my colleagues, Ozpin said. Not yet. Not until I feed the livestock. Then we can go, and it won't take too long as I have a transformation with 4 arms and is super strong, Oscar said. Very well. Though may I suggest creating drawings of these transformations and give them names? It would make it much easier to understand what you're talking about, Ozpin said. Sure. But later. As you said, we can't waste any more time. Now it's transformation time, Oscar said, popping the dial up. Oscar, Emma called. Coming, Oscar yelled. Oscar then walked up to his aunt. That was a short trip, Oscar said. Well, the Forever Knights have done great work at rebuilding the town and I would just be getting in the way if I stayed. I also got paid for the robot, so I'm going to start on fixing the tractor and end your long days of torture, Emma said. Emma then began to walk to the garage. Hey. Instead, why don't you head to bed? You must be very tired, Oscar said. I would love to, but we need that tractor fixed as soon as possible, Emma said. That's why you should rest before doing so. Being tired will just make the repairs slower. And don't worry about me, I'll be fine, just go have some much needed rest, Oscar said. And who made you in charge? Emma asked. No one. I'm just looking out for my aunt. Just as she's done for me several times, Oscar said. Emma chuckled. Very well. I'll rest till the afternoon. Our connection to the network should be back up by then, Emma said. Have a good rest. You've earned it, Oscar said. Just don't wear yourself out, Emma said. I won't, Oscar said. Emma then entered the house and went to bed. Okay, livestock, it's feeding time, Oscar said. Oscar then headed to the barn to pick up the feed. He then transformed into a creature with 4 arms and red skin. He easily picked up the feed and had to feed the animals. A short while later, Oscar had grabbed his backpack and was now stood at the entrance to the farm. Oscar looked off into the distance for a short while before looking back at the farmhouse before turning back. Oscar then walked off the farm. I'm sorry, Ozpin said. You know, the weirdest part is how it feels. Leaving home is crazy. Going to the city is crazy. Everything you've told me is completely crazy. But it doesn't feel crazy anymore. It feels like I'm doing the right thing, Oscar said. Well, I suppose that's good, Ozpin said. No. It's scary, Oscar said. Thunder then crackled in the distance. Oscar looked up to see that the sky had gotten darker. I suggest you speed things up. Unless you want to get drenched, Ozpin said. I would say you've read my mind, but you literally can, Oscar said. Indeed, though I will try not to read your mind, but eventually I won't be able to do that as we become one, Ozpin said. That's what scares me the most about this, Oscar said quietly. Oscar then used the Omnitrix to transform into a being that had balls on the ends of its feet, allowing Oscar to move very fast. Oscar quickly arrived at the train station and went under the canopy just as it began to rain. Thankfully no one was around, so Oscar didn't need to hide before transforming back. Oscar then walked up to the ticket machine and tried to buy a ticket. Unfortunately, the only thing Oscar got was an error message. Error. Unable to complete request. Reason given, insufficient funds, code 726. The message read. Stupid thing. I'm assuming whatever weird magic this is doesn't come with an infinite supply of money, Oscar said. I'm afraid you'll have to solve this one on your own, Ozpin said. Oscar suddenly became more alert. How? Oscar questioned. Be on your guard, Ozpin said. What do you mean? Oscar asked. Walking towards the station, in the rain, was a large man. This man's name was Hazel Reinhardt. Here, Hazel said. Hazel stopped near the machine and raised up his fist. In response, Oscar flinched, thinking Hazel was about to hit him. Hazel then slammed his fist down on the machine, which beeped, and then a ticket came out from the machine. Oscar picked up the ticket as Hazel walked back into the rain. Hazel then turned back to Oscar. Don't let such a small obstacle block your path, Hazel said. He resumed on his way, while Oscar watched. That man. I felt. Who is he? Oscar asked. Someone from my past. Someone who should not be taken lightly, Ozpin said. A short while later a train heading to Mistral arrived at the station and Oscar quickly boarded. So, what are we going to do once we arrive in Mistral? Oscar asked. If we were in any other kingdom we would head the academy and meet up with the headmaster or someone I trust in the case for Vale. But not for Mistral, Ozpin said. Why? Oscar asked. There are several reasons why we're not going to meet up with Leonardo Leonhardt. First on is that I'm suspicious of him, Ozpin said. Why are you suspicious of him? Oscar said. He has stopped checking in and reporting to me, which makes me fear that he has been compromised. Leo couldn't lie even if it was to save his life. It's very easy to tell when he's lying, so I fear that he hasn't been contacting me for that reason. Also, the ones responsible for pulling the strings behind the fall of Beacon came from Haven Academy as students. And when I had a look at the profiles for every student that came to Beacon for the Vital Festival, Team Crimson only had generic background info and they were personally brought into Haven by Leo himself, Ozpin said. So he's willingly working for the enemy, Oscar said. I don't think willingly isn't the right word. Leo has cautious and lack courage. I fear that she has gotten to him, Ozpin said. Who is she? Oscar asked. I'll explain when we meet up with my informant, who is most likely already in Mistral. I have a feeling that 2 first-year teams are also with my informant and would not like to repeat myself, Ozpin said. Oscar grunted. He didn't like having to wait to know what he was getting into. So, who's this informant? Oscar asked. That I will tell you. His name is Qrow Branwen. I would send him on long missions to keep the world safe, Ozpin said. Guess he failed, Oscar said. No, I fail. I became like Leo, I was too cautious and wanted to do things discreetly as to not cause panic. But in my pursuit to keep things as they were, I was too slow in taking action. It all blew up in my face after the breach and General Ironwood was put in charge of security, which led to his army of robots being hacked, Ozpin said. I see. So what are we going to do? Oscar asked. We're going to take action and stop Haven from being the next to fall, Ozpin said. What makes you so sure they'll attack Haven next? Oscar asked. If my suspicions are true, Haven will be easy pickings, Ozpin said. That makes sense, Oscar said. Also, there is something at Haven that we need to protect. In fact, every kingdom has a great power that needs to be protected, but Haven's is the most powerful. And the one at most risk? Ozpin asked. Shouldn't it be at Beacon? Oscar asked. It's a lot harder to get this great power located at Beacon, Ozpin said. If you say so, Oscar said. Oscar then looks out of the carriage window watching the scenery fly by. Several hours later, Oscar arrived in Mistral. How are we going to find Qrow? I don't have a scroll, Oscar said. We don't need a scroll. We just need to head to a bar, Ozpin said. A bar? Oscar questioned. Ozpin then led Oscar to a certain bar. Oscar entered the bar to see a man with a red cape drinking. That is Qrow. Tell him, I'd like my cane back. He'll know what that means, Ozpin said. Okay, Oscar said. Oscar then walked up to Qrow. Excuse me, Oscar said. Qrow turned around to face Oscar. You know, I don't think they allow kids in here, pipsqueak, Qrow said. Oscar just looked at Qrow. Come on. Tell him, Ozpin said. Shut up, I'm getting there, Oscar said. Qrow gave him a questioning look. I'm supposed to tell you, I'd like my cane back, Oscar said. Qrow's eyes widened for a moment in surprise. Qrow then nodded his head and stood up. It's good to see you again, Ounce, Qrow said. Qrow then threw Ozpin's cane at Oscar. Oscar caught it and the cane expanded out of its portable form. Oscar looked up and down the cane before looking back at Qrow. Mind if I take over? Ozpin asked. Right. Go ahead, Oscar said. Oscar then gave Ozpin control. So, what happened after my death? Ozpin asked. It's a long story, Qrow said. It always is, Ozpin said. Ozpin and Qrow then sat at the bar and the two informed each other on what happened since they last met. Many drinks later, Ozpin and Qrow had caught up and now they were heading to the house Qrow and those he was with were staying. And unfortunately for Oscar, he was having to look after a very drunk Qrow. Why am I the one having to look after Qrow, and why didn't you stop him from drinking too much? Oscar asked. I'm sorry, but taking control does take a lot out of me, especially since I've only just reincarnated in your body. As for allowing him to drink so much, I can only apologize, Ozpin said. Oscar sighed. Just ask for Ruby Rose and say her uncle is a bit tipsy, Qrow said, hiccuping. Oscar was intrigued by the name Qrow had given him. Her name kept ringing in his ears over and over again. Ruby Rose, Oscar repeated again and again. Her name was both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. He found the name beautiful and wondered if the woman herself was as beautiful as her name suggested. The name also brought up several memories Ozpin had of her, making him think of warm cookies and milk, the scent of rose petals and an infectious laughter. Oscar decided to go on ahead of Qrow in hopes to get some help in corralling the drunk man. Oscar knocked on the door and a boy with blonde hair in armor answered the door. Oscar could also see two others sitting on a sofa behind the armored boy. "Can I help you?" the boy asked. Yeah. Is there a ruby rose here?" Oscar asked. The two people behind the armored boy immediately stood up, tense and defensive. "Why?" Nora asked. "Well," Oscar said. He looked to his left and then Qrow appeared, moving drunkenly and grabbing Oscar by the shoulders. "I found him," Qrow yelled. Qrow snorted into his hand and continued laughing as he stumbled into the house. "I think her uncle could use some help," Oscar said. Qrow almost made it to a sofa before he stumbled and then falling backwards onto the cushions. "Whoa. I found him," Qrow yelled. "What is going on out there?" a girl asked. A girl in a red cape, that was much brighter than Qrow's, stomped into the tomb. "Can't a girl read her comics in peace?" the girl asked. Qrow burped and chuckled, catching the girl's attention. She sighed and put a hand to her forehead exasperatedly. "Qrow, did you get drunk again?" the girl asked. "Maybe," Qrow said. Oscar then noticed her eyes. They seemed very familiar to him. He could tell that this girl was Ruby Rose, and her beauty did match with her name. "Oh. You have silver eyes," Oscar said. Ruby looked at him, a touch surprised. She turned to the others who shrugged at her, before looking back at Oscar. "Who are you?" Ruby asked. Qrow chuckled from the couch. Well. My name is Oscar Pine," Oscar said. "Wait for it," Qrow said. "But you probably know me as Professor Ozpin," Oscar said. The four gasped and looked confused. Qrow continued chuckling. "I did it," Qrow yelled, punching the air. He then fell off the sofa onto the floor. "You," the ginger-haired girl said, hands going to her mouth. Hours earlier, Emma had woken up from her nap. She went downstairs to see a note on the table. She picked up the note and read it. Her eyes went wide as she did. "That stupid boy," Emma said. Emma then rushed out of the house and to the barn. "I should have confronted him about this. He's going to get into big trouble," Emma said. Emma then opened the barn door to see the piles of seed bags and the pile of crystals. Emma sighed. "Thanks for thinking of me before you left, Oscar. But you didn't need to do this. Then again, I can use these crystals for another purpose," Emma said. Emma then walked to a wall of the barn. She then pressed the wall and then several wood planks moved to show a lever. Emma pulled the lever and an alarm sounded. The floor of the barn then began to lower. The floor then stopped, and several lights came on showing a bunch of high-tech equipment. In the middle of the underground base was an old rusty RV. "Guess it's time to get the old rust bucket back up and running," Emma said. End of chapter 3.